Well, good morning, everybody. I know the cities and the burbs are a little bit odd today. Thanks for coming out. And no, the oddity is not that it's -3, right? It's kind of normal for us. We know that. But welcome to FUS Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. If you get bored, you can watch the helicopters flying around outside. How about that? I'm David Breeden. I'm the senior minister here, and joining me today is the Reverend Jim Fody, our assistant minister, Barb Brooks, music director, and Jane Smith, ministerial intern. FUS Unitarian Society is a Unitarian Universalist congregation and the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. What's humanism, you ask? It's a way of life based on the best of human thought and dedicated to the well-being of all humanity, living things, and the planet. As the foundation and beacon of congregational humanism, here we strive to be a safe place to share the dangerous ideas of our world as we build bridges between the religious and the secular. We go beyond belief to join together in a common struggle for common values. Our theme for the month of February is adaptation, because it's Darwin's birthday month, right? And today I will be considering how religion adapts to change and how change adapts to religion. Yes, I have a text from Rev Kelly who said, last night we hosted 20 activists from Ohio here for the Take a Knee Nation Conference on Racism, Police Violence, and the Right to Protest. Rev Kelly spent the night here with them and made some great connections, and we received copious compliments on our beautiful building, especially our gender-neutral bathrooms. Good use of our building, huh? And good work, everybody involved in all of that. We will be doing some videotaping today. We got a request from one of the Unitarian congregations in Romania to see what we do on Sunday mornings. So that's what's going on up in the balcony. After assembly today, enjoy a mini meal, Indian vegetable curry, and we do need a couple of volunteers to help with some cleanup because things are just not quite normal today. So there you go. While you're downstairs, our group Active Voices has DACA postcards to sign, looks like that, and also a petition to pass the bills to protect Robert Mueller and his investigation. So that's the two things going on at our Active Voices table for this morning. We won't be doing any noon programming today due to all of the festivities outside and the traffic, except for our young adult discussion group that will be meeting in the circle room outside and to the left. But as I mentioned, we will be doing our mini meal. Don't miss the new art in the gallery. It's by FUS member Tom Foley. It's up and down the Mississippi River, so I feel at home on both ends of that, and it's really cool photography. Be sure to check that out. You can find out what's going on at our society. Check out our Facebook page, our Twitter page, our FUSUnitarian.org page. Please feel free to use your bio-external extended mind device anytime you want to today. If you get the perfect picture, send it to me, minister@FUSUnitarian.org. Also, we have our TV monitors upstairs and downstairs. Guests, we're really glad you're here today. If you have any questions, we do have a welcome table downstairs after assembly. Be very happy to tell you all about what's going on here at the Society.
Each week when we gather, we hear one of our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles as read by one of our young people. Today, our chalice lighter is Theo Bubzer.
I light this chalice for acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations.
If you could please now rise as you are able and join me in singing Morning Has Broken, number 38 in your gray songbook. If you could now join me in reading the Congregational Covenant printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now, there was once a beautiful city called the City of Sand, and it rested right alongside a large, beautiful river. And in this city of sand lived a group of people called the Sanders. And as you might guess, the Sanders built everything out of sand, and it was beautiful. They dyed the sand all the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. And with this sand, they built buildings and parks and statues, all held together with their super secret glue. Now, the Sanders were great artists, but they were not very nice people. Not to each other, and definitely not to the Dusters, who lived up on a dusty hill outside of town. Now, the Dusters didn't build things beautiful, they built things to survive. So their houses were strong and sturdy, and it was said that the Dusters could build a house out of just about everything. Now, for as long as anyone could remember, the Sanders lived down by the river, and the Dusters lived up on their dusty hill. And it's no surprise that the Sanders really looked down on the Dusters and thought they were better than the Dusters. And the Dusters weren't even allowed down into the City of Sand because they might dirty it. Until one day. One day, the river along the City of Sand began to rise and rise, and no one knew why. And at first, the Sanders were excited and happy, but it got higher and higher, and they began to get scared. And soon the river spilled out into their city. And that's when they realized that their super secret glue dissolved in water. And so the city began to collapse. And that night, the Sanders slept out in the open for the first time ever. And when they woke up, their city was completely gone. It all collapsed, and there was just a big pile of sand. And they thought, oh no, what are we going to do? Our city is ruined. And now up on the hill, the Dusters saw what was happening. And they began to whisper together, and they came down the hill. And the Sanders thought, oh, we have been so mean to these people for so long. Are they going to come down here and mock us? But the Dusters went down to the overflown river and began collecting driftwood. And they sorted their driftwood into piles of shape and size and began to build. And now, the Sanders weren't very nice people, but they did admire creativity. And so they watched the Dusters building this city, and soon they walked over and joined them. And together, the Dusters taught the Sanders how to build strong, sturdy buildings, and the Sanders taught the Dusters how to build things beautiful. And so they worked together, and they had so much fun. And they built, and eventually the city was too big for just the Sanders. And eventually they decided to stop. And when they did, they wanted to celebrate. So the Dusters went up to the top of their dusty hill and collected all the food they had and brought it back down. And they began to feast. Now, it wasn't the kind of food the Sanders were used to, which was sweet and syrupy, because that had been washed away in the flood. But they ate together, and because of all the hard work they had and all the fun they had together, the food tasted delicious. And they stayed together feasting and eating this food, and the Dusters decided they didn't want to leave. So they stayed, and they were friends, and they played together and worked together, and they were one people who decided to live in this city. The city that they called Driftwood, so that they would never forget where it came from. Thank you. And let's please sing the children to class. The words are printed in your order of service.
Each week when we gather, we take a few minutes to reflect on the joys, sorrows, and milestones of the human experience. We do this so that we stay in touch with our own humanity. We do this to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness. And we do this so that no one among us is alone, either in celebrating joy or in facing the burdens of life. This morning, we mourn the death and celebrate the life of FUS member John Groce. John died a week ago Saturday at the age of 91. With his family gathered from around the country and overseas, a private memorial service was held the next day. We extend our condolences to his wife Ginny and to their entire family. John's legacy includes serving as Director of Special Education for the state of Minnesota. He touched many lives both in his work and as a dear family member and friend. He will be greatly missed. If you'd like to send a card to Ginny or to other FUS members facing challenges, please stop by the card basket downstairs during the mini-meal. We now take a minute of silence to reflect on the many people in our lives and in our world who are struggling, to acknowledge the gifts and struggles in our own lives, and to appreciate those who bring goodness and abundance to us and to the world.
We should mention that Barb is playing music today from the two cities in the Super Bowl and the host. Now, I held out. There aren't that many Boston songs, right? But I was holding out for Dirty Water, but that's really not a piano song, apparently. So.
I would encourage you guys to clap at the end when I play Philadelphia Free.
Yeah, get into the rhythm there. Get into the rhythm. The reading this morning is from Catherine Lofton, Professor of Religious Studies, American Studies, History, and Divinity at Yale University. She's also the Deputy Dean of Diversity and Faculty Development and Chair of the Department of Religious Studies at Yale. First, nobody evades being organized by something. Second, if you're being organized by something, it is worth learning the terms for that organization. Third, if you learn points 1 and 2, you will be a part of the study of religion. Every Goldman Sachs employee with whom I met was absolutely comfortable with the word religion applied to their community. Indeed, when I pressed them, saying how many scholars of religion found the term problematic for the following X or Y reason, they got it, but they still didn't care. They didn't mind the word because they liked how it demonstrated the seriousness, the proud intensity of their collectivity. And this is what I want to emphasize in my study of consumer culture and religion. Religion is a word for how people consciously organize themselves in the world and unconsciously are organized by the world. Insofar as ours is a world built by material and immaterial networks and grids, I think we're missing out if we think of those networks and grids as secular or religious. We are missing out insofar as we are missing what I have found as the archival intention of designers, namely to organize themselves and us into a world they get thereby to organize. The problem of collectivity is the danger of assimilating into any of the grids. The possibility of collectivity is the strength we have to rewrite our frames together to design different societies.
Good morning. I'm Phil Duran, member of the Board of Trustees here at FUS. First Unitarian Society is an independent, self-supporting, democratically governed congregation that exists and thrives due to the generosity and commitment of our members in terms of time, talent, and treasure. If our ushers will please come forward, we'll take the morning offering to keep FUS thriving. If you'd like to participate but didn't bring cash or checkbook, there will be a credit card kiosk available downstairs after the assembly. Thanks.
A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the rapidly fragmenting landscape of religion. For that talk, I asked a basic question: what the heck is religion anyway? What one discovers fairly quickly in digging down a bit is that religion isn't as easy to define as it might at first appear. One concise answer I used a couple of weeks ago comes from William James, who opined that religion is about, 1, an uneasiness, and 2, the solution to that uneasiness. Notice that James is looking at the personal in religion. That's, what goes on in the human brain. Another way of defining religion is the way Dr. Lofton at Yale Divinity School, in the reading this morning, defines it. Quote, religion is a word for how people consciously organize themselves in the world and unconsciously are organized by the world. And notice that this is about the public and the communal together. It's how you do things and how you think. An idea that came up as I discussed the concept of religion with some of you during social hour a couple of weeks ago originates from the religion scholar Reza Aslan, who is very clear about what religion is. Nobody knows. Aslan is willing to take a stab at a one-word definition, however, and that word is not God or morality or ethics or love, but identity. Identity. And notice that that is about the public side of religion. These are the ideas I want to throw into a sack and shake a little bit on this Super Bowl Sunday as the city of Minneapolis roils with a bustle of hundreds of thousands of visitors and fans. After all, it's difficult not to see this yearly ritual as some sort of mass religion. What are we saying when we say the word religion? And what do we think we're doing when we do religion? Well, first, let's consider the insight that Dr. John Dietrich brought to this congregation when he was called back in 1917. Dietrich imagined an American Protestant-style religious gathering that could be done without reference to a God or traditional religious trappings such as scripture or religious language. Secular poetry and secular music, Dietrich thought, would do just as well. Out of this insight, Dietrich and the people of this congregation created what they called religious humanism and what today I like to call congregational humanism. 101 years of weekly meetings have proven that the model does work. And today, you ministers, ethical culture leaders, and humanist celebrants across the nation serve the life passage needs of people who do not identify in traditional religious terms. But there is a problem with John Dietrich's old model. When Dietrich arrived here in 1917, most everyone in the city belonged to a congregation of one sort or another. When Dietrich and his partner in humanism, Curtis Rees, thought they were doing back in those days was placing a time bomb under Christian dogma, but they were keeping the idea of a congregation. They thought that science and critical thinking and technology and democracy would destroy ideas that they considered to be old-fashioned, such ideas as a God who is much like a European king, such ideas as praying rather than rolling up your sleeves and getting to work, such ideas as passivity in the face of government, economics, superstition, and the human condition in general. A century and more have shown that they were only partially correct in their assumptions. What blew up was not superstition or the human need for the spiritual. Rather, it was the social binding that religion offered that went to pieces over these 10 decades. The telephone, the automobile, the radio, then television, then the internet. Since 1917, the physical bodies and brains of our species have evolved in the slow, halting pace that they have always evolved. But our technology has developed at breakneck speed. In the century of humanism, capitalism went from a system severely questioned by the Russian Bolshevik Revolution and then the economic collapse of the Great Depression. And then it became the only game in town for most of the human beings on our planet. Things have changed, and our thinking about what religion means must change as well. The reading this morning is from Dr. Catherine Lofton, who's a professor of religious studies, American studies, history, and divinity at Yale, as I mentioned. And I mentioned that because she is in a truly postmodern position of looking at what religion is. In her latest book, called Consuming Religion, Dr. Lofton writes, "First, nobody evades being organized by something. Second, if you're being organized by something, it's worth learning the terms for that organization. And as I read earlier, third, if you learn those points, you are studying religion." Notice that this definition addresses both private and public aspects of the human religious impulse. This is the idea I want to explore today, the organizing principle of religion, what Dr. Reza Aslan calls identity. As we heard in the reading, Dr. Lofton believes that organization is the essence of religion. The question is, what is organizing us, and how aware are we of how we are being organized? Lofton argues that we're looking at the wrong thing about religion when we look for traditional religious trappings, such as the search for the sacred. Lofton argues that religion is, at its base, an organizing principle, and any and all organizing principles should be considered religions. That's important to the argument. We call football a religion. We call political parties religions. We call capitalism a religion. Cooking, birding, the employees at Goldman Sachs call the corporate culture at Goldman Sachs a religion. Again, Lofton is making a bold claim. Anything that organizes, either physically or socially or mentally, is a religion. Clearly, we can't escape being organized by various forces, but what we can do is be conscious of the power of organization and use it rather than be used by it. Now, actually, this insight is one that Unitarian transcendentalists embraced a long time ago. In mid-20th century America, people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Margaret Fuller, Henry David Thoreau claimed that nature itself is sacred, and therefore walking in the woods is as sacred or even more sacred than going to church. Well, why? Because nature encourages us to think outside of social structures, which is basically the keystone of transcendentalism. The humanist insight is that even if there is a God, that God is unlikely to have anything to do with human problems or human actions. Therefore, meaning and purpose and moral action are all human constructs in the hands of the human collective. All ordering is human, claims humanism. Therefore, we humans have the freedom to rethink all social norms and assumptions. This insight led the first generation of humanists to democratic socialism during the Great Depression of the 1930s, because they insisted that human beings create economies and consequently human actions create the economic inequalities. The social order is a human order, and the first Humanist Manifesto in 1933 insisted on a shared life for all the people in a shared world. Since the Cold War, mainstream economic theory has insisted that only market capitalism can create the sorts of societies in which economic opportunity and liberal social policy can exist, that inviolability of the individual choice. Neoliberalism is the term that has emerged for that set of assumptions. They are ways of ordering reality. Let's face it, most American citizens have no real choice in their economic circumstance. In the neoliberal scenario, part of the collateral damage of free market capitalism is that most people live lives of economic desperation. Many Americans love the fact that we can choose which video game to play or which television show to binge watch, but these same Americans do not consider whether or not to go deeply into debt. That's a given in our consumer culture. Being a consumer and servicing debt are the ordering of our lives in this country. It's our religion, Dr. Lofton claims. Remember the words, nobody evades being organized by something. It's a good question to ponder. What's organizing you? What is your religion really? Economics? Politics? Social class? Education? Race? Gender? Age? Health? Probably a whole array of those things and more. The act of looking at those organizational principles is the act of religion. I like that definition of religion. Religion becomes an act of meta, looking at our lives from a kind of above angle. Dr. Lofton encourages each of us to engage in the ultimate religious question. What is the order of the order you have chosen to order your life? And are you choosing that order, or is that order choosing you? Is your ordering inevitable? Keep asking, she says, that's doing religion. Dr. Lofton goes on to say, quote, where our social and ritual interests are placed now is not in denominational tradition, but in workplace culture. Not in inherited objects, but recently purchased goods. Not archaic icons, but an endlessly rotating cast of minor and major celebrities. I wonder who's doing the Super Bowl today. And how holy are they? Ordering, identity, what we actually allow to order our lives. John Dietrich and Curtis Rees, the two horsemen of the humanist apocalypse in the early 20th century, did not foresee that congregational affiliation would become as easily changeable as tennis shoes and just as easily discarded. Dietrich remained a minister in this congregation for 22 years. Now, that's a commitment to congregational doing things, isn't it? Curtis Rees, however, his buddy, left congregational ministry entirely. Rees became the first president of the American Humanist Association in 1941. The AHA has been a secular alternative to religious gatherings all of these years. In terms of the ability of religions to adapt and innovate, humanism, in other words, was born already as an adaptation. It was an ordering and identity principle. As second-wave feminists said long ago, the personal is political. The political is also personal. How our society will shape and order your existence can be deadly. From racism to fat shaming, from heteronormativity to position and wealth, none of us is ever free from the social ordering in our lives. One thing congregations can do better than any other place, I think, is put those ordering social assumptions under interrogation. That's the first reason to congregate, I believe, to gather with other human beings, because that is how we human beings have evolved, in groups, pushing and shoving and hugging each other. As I've mentioned before, it's amazing, but the largest donors to our capital campaign here, and our largest yearly pledgers here at this society insist on being anonymous. That is countercultural, for sure, in a nation where money and social class determine everything from where you live to what you eat to how long you will live. That humanist insight that we choose to order our lives questions basic social assumptions. What else does this congregation do for those who congregate here? We've talked before about how John Dietrich claimed that humanists don't need pastoral care. They can do it themselves. He thought humanists can work through life's problems on their own. Again, that's that personal aspect of religion. Now, from one angle, that's a really silly thing to say. From another, it does make sense. The fact is, humanists don't tend to go to their religious leaders for the same reasons that traditional religious people go to their religious leaders. Humanists aren't likely to go to me and ask, "Why did God do this?" Most humanists don't think there's a God that does much of anything. "Why did God send that tsunami?" The humanist answer is He didn't. "Why did God give me cancer?" The humanist answer is He didn't. Those why conversations are fairly short among us humanists. People like to build on ocean fronts in the Pacific. Ocean fronts in the Pacific occasionally get hit by tsunamis. Whether or not you or a loved one or an acquaintance happen to be on the Pacific beachfront when a tsunami hits is a matter of happenstance. That's the humanist answer. These are easy conversations for us. We know that, as Bill Nye the Science Guy is fond of putting it, everything happens for a reason, and that reason is usually physics. But that doesn't mean that pastoral care isn't important in a primarily humanist congregation. It's just that our questions tend to be different. For example, the grief process is an evolved feature of the human mind. We humanists know that. We all know that natural disasters hit, that people suffer and die in all kinds of ways, sometimes tragically, sometimes because organic life necessarily has an expiration date. Knowing that suffering and death are natural and inevitable parts of human life doesn't mean they don't hurt. It's just that we think we know why. We have a grief group here not because we are attempting to explain away grief or convince ourselves that our loved ones are in a better place, but because it helps to think about it and talk about our grief. That's the personal in congregational humanism. Humanism is, kind of the Swiss Army knife of religious thought because the principles of humanism are really kind of short and sweet. Number one, the universe is flying apart at an accelerating rate. Therefore, the only constant is change. Two, human beings have created the ideas of meaning and purpose, and therefore each of us must create meaning and purpose in our own lives. Three, the bottom line is that we evolved as communal animals, and therefore we need each other and we need to have each other's backs. That's about it. It's pretty short and sweet. Catherine Lofton says, quote, "I want scholars, thinkers, students, and citizens to imagine what work they might make religion do for them to organize the world other than how it has been organized," end quote. That's it, I think. From the personal to the public, we congregate to aggregate our human power. From the personal to the political, I am because we are. And we are because we interrogate the choices we are making and the choices that are making us.
If you could now rise in body and or spirit and join me in singing "Love Will Guide Us," number 131 in your gray songbook.
If you will please be seated and turn in your order of service to our Extinguishing the Chalice words and repeat with me, please. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together